Hello and welcome to Missouri Legislative Update. This month we bring you our program from the historic House Lounge in the Missouri State Capitol. In this month's show, we take a look at several of the stories making news during the 2013 legislative session. I'm Jonathan Lorenz reporting for the Missouri House of Representatives.
And reporting for the Missouri Senate, I'm Jennifer Yapel. Before the conclusion of the first half of the 2013 legislative session, the Senate sent several bills to the governor for his executive approval. The measures address certain benevolent tax credits and would spur economic development through the state. Senate Communications correspondent Brad Bayshore has more.
Senate Bill 10, sponsored by Senator Eric Schmidt of Glendale, would create a tax credit to attract amateur sporting events to the Show Me State. The bill would authorize up to $3 million in tax credits per year, intended to attract events like NCAA tournaments and Olympic trials. The bill's sponsor says it's an effort to spur economic activity.
To not only benefit our coffers here in Jefferson City, but more importantly, the small business owners that own the bars, the restaurants, the hotel owners, the whole industry that surrounds tourism.
Once the bill left the Senate, members of the House agreed Missouri must do everything it can to bring these types of sporting attractions back to the state because other states are already booking these events in the future.
We are going to continue to have a problem attracting these sporting events if we don't pass this legislation. States like Texas and some of the other ones that are getting some of these NCAA tournaments, they're just not coming back to the state unless we do this.
If approved by the governor, the tax credit would go into effect August 28, 2013, and would expire in 6 years unless reauthorized. The General Assembly also approved Senate Bill 20, a measure that would modify various provisions regarding benevolent tax credits. The measure, sponsored by Senator Bob Dixon of Springfield, would, among other provisions, help surviving spouses of public safety officers, assist crisis nurseries and child advocacy centers, facilitate individuals with disabilities, give aid to pregnancy resource centers, and help Missouri's food banks and pantries.
It encourages individuals to give locally and support their friends and neighbors who are truly on the front lines helping others. And with that, I renew my motion.
The measure was finally passed in the Senate the same day the Catholic Church elected a new pope.
You know, the one group I have heard from more than any other on the benevolent tax credits that are in this bill are the Catholic Charities of St. Louis, and I think it's fitting if we can get this bill to the governor's desk on this day of all days. That'd be really something very special. Thank you, Senator.
Senate Bill 20 contains an emergency clause, meaning the legislation would take effect immediately upon the governor's signature. Reporting for the Missouri Senate, I'm Brad Bayshore.
The Missouri House approved a proposal aiming to provide more information to parents regarding the schools in the state. In this next story, we take a look at how a proposed school grade card aims to better inform parents when it comes to their children's education.
Lawmakers approved a proposal aiming to provide parents with better information regarding the schools in their school district. House Bill 388 creates the Parent and Community School Information Act. The legislation requires the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education to produce a report card for each school and charter school in the state. Supporters of the grade school proposal claim the legislation is all about giving parents more information.
We are ensuring that parents are informed of whether the school their children attends is successful, is mediocre, or is having great difficulty and, in fact, failure to properly educate those children.
The legislation also states the grade card must be easy to understand and easily accessible for all parents in the state. However, not everyone supports the new grade card. Some believe it will have unintended consequences.
Schools that are labeled D or F will be seen as failures. And yes, I do believe that parents will want to initiate change, but the change they most likely will initiate is a change in location of their child's school, moving to a different district.
Lawmakers approved the school grade card legislation with more than 125 yes votes. The proposal now heads to the Senate for consideration.
Nearly 70 measures originating in the Senate have been sent to the House for its consideration. One of the upper chamber's top priorities for the 2013 legislative session is to pass legislation designed to create jobs and grow the economy in the Show Me State. Senate Bill 1, sponsored by Senator Scott T. Roop of Wentzville, creates temporary funding mechanisms to bolster the state's second injury fund when usual collections do not meet the fund's demands. This fund, which is currently insolvent, is designed to help injured workers when a current work-related injury combines with a prior disability to create an increased combined disability. The legislation establishes priority for paying second injury fund liabilities, eliminates claims for permanent partial disability, and creates an expanded benefit for occupational diseases due to certain toxic exposure.
This is what I believe is a really good bill for the injured worker. It's a really good bill for businesses from small to big, to where they can have, for a few pennies on the dollar, get a lot of risk exposure mitigated, especially when it comes to toxic diseases.
Legislation sponsored by Senator Will Kraus of Lee Summit is designed to cut certain taxes to promote job growth in Missouri. Senate Bill 26 would lower individual and corporate state income tax, raise the state sales and use tax, and allow for the collection of taxes on internet sales. Senator Paul LaVota of Independence tells his colleagues that cutting the state income tax while increasing Missouri's sales tax is not the right answer.
We've cut revenue to where it has reduced this state government, and now this bill does it faster and quicker. And there's a race to the bottom that we're going to win against Kansas because we're going to go right to the bottom.
Additional legislation sponsored by Senator Kraus would define two terms, misconduct and good cause, that are used when examining reasons to disqualify an individual for unemployment benefits. Legislation creating the Missouri Export Incentive Act, sponsored by Senator Eric Schmidt of Glendale, relates to data storage center incentives, the Neighborhood Preservation Act, as well as the low-income housing, self-employed health insurance, historic preservation, and brownfield remediation tax credits. Some lawmakers expressed their concern over reforms to certain low-income tax credits.
We need to address the abuse without depleting the program. If we want to talk about reform, let's talk about reform, but let's talk about reasonable reform. Let's not talk about depleting a program that is very important to so many other folks across the state.
Senate Bill 120 would also authorize air export tax credits for freight forwarders to qualifying outbound flights from the Lambert-St. Louis International Airport.
I think it's important for us to come together and have a Senate position to continue this process, to send something over to the Missouri House of Representatives, and ultimately get to a place where, again, we have resolution on these very, very important issues.
Finally, Senate Bill 29, sponsored by Senator Dan Brown of Rolla, would require annual authorization for certain labor unions to use dues and fees to make political contributions and bar these unions from withholding earnings from their members' paychecks. Senate Minority Floor Leader Jolie Justice of Kansas City explains the confusion many have with the bill and offers a failed amendment during debate to separate the bill's two provisions.
Is that there is a misconception that union dues that are being directly withdrawn from paychecks are being used for political contributions. And it is my understanding that political contributions are separate and apart from the union dues. So these are two different parts of the bill, and those are two different issues altogether.
Senate Leader Tom Dempsey speaks in support of the bill before the Senate sends it to the House, comparing fees and dues members pay into unions to a polite and respectful relationship.
What this policy moves forward is a please and a thank you. Hey, we provide what we believe is a valuable service to you, and that you benefit from it. And what we are asking is if you would please support our efforts.
These job and economic growth measures still await full debate by the House.
A Missouri House committee approved a proposal aiming to protect the rights of medical professionals. In this next story, we take a look at how the legislation hopes to keep medical workers from being forced to participate in any medical procedure that violates their beliefs.
The Missouri House Committee on Healthcare Policy put its stamp of approval on a proposal aiming to protect medical workers who refuse to participate in a medical service on the basis of religious or moral principles. House Bill 457 states the medical professional cannot be held liable for declining to participate in any medical procedure that violates their beliefs. The sponsor of the proposal claims his legislation aims to protect medical workers.
This bill truly is for workers. It's for employees. And it provides them a shield, not a sword, provides them a shield to exercise their religious beliefs, which are sacrosanct in both our Missouri and federal constitutions.
The legislation does include language requiring healthcare workers to provide life-saving treatment during an emergency situation, even if the treatment violates their principles. Several special interest groups testified against the proposal, claiming the legislation could cause harm to rape victims.
If this bill were to go into effect and become law, it would allow healthcare providers to deny that information and deny access to emergency contraception, and we feel that that is what is actually unconscionable here.
The committee approved the bill by a 5-3 vote, and after receiving approval from the House Rules Committee, it now heads to the House floor for consideration.
The Missouri House approved a proposed change to the state's constitution aiming to protect victims of sex crimes. Supporters claim the legislation makes it easier to convict those who prey on the state's future, while opponents argue the proposal tips the balance of power in the courtroom.
The Missouri House passed a proposed change to the state's constitution, changing the way sex offenders are prosecuted. House Joint Resolution 16 allows evidence from prior criminal investigations to be used against a defendant accused of a sex crime. The evidence can only be considered if the victim is less than 16 years old. The sponsor of the legislation claims the constitutional amendment gives another tool to the state's justice system when it comes to fighting sex offenders.
This constitutional amendment will be a basis for our courts to be able to decide that they can allow this evidence, or this propensity evidence, into admission. I think that we can go home this week and we can say, you know what, we did something to truly protect children.
Previously, this type of evidence was allowed in the state, but in 2007, the Missouri Supreme Court ruled it unconstitutional. Not everyone agrees with the proposed change to the state's constitution. Several opponents claim the proposal tips the balance of power in the courtroom.
With our system, our legal system of proof, our checks, our balances, that delicate balance between protecting an individual's rights against a crime they may or may not have committed versus protecting children. It's unnecessary, Mr. Speaker.
The Missouri House approved the proposed change to the state's constitution with 130 yes votes. If approved by the General Assembly, the proposal must be approved by the voters before becoming law.
After the break, one of the state's top newsmakers sits down with a member of the Missouri House to discuss several hot-button issues moving through the legislative process. That and more after the break on Missouri Legislative Update.
The odds of becoming a successful NASCAR driver, 1 in 125 billion. The odds of a child being diagnosed with autism, 1 in 88. I'm Jamie McMurray. Learn more at autismspeaks.org/signs.
Representative Todd Richardson of Poplar Bluff is with us on our Capitol Dialogue segment this week. He is the chairman of the Emerging Issues in Healthcare Committee in the House of Representatives. It's his second term. His father was the minority leader of the House of Representatives back in the 1990s. Have you gotten much advice from your father about this House of Representatives business?
He's always happy to give me advice, and of course it was very different legislature back then. But there's a lot of lessons you can learn from his experience here and the members of the House that came before me.
How does that help you out?
Well, I think it's given me a pretty good perspective and a little bit of sense of history. When my father was here, Republicans were in a deep minority, it serves as a good reminder for me that remember what it's like to be in the minority and don't abuse the privilege that we enjoy now as Republicans being in the majority. Treat your colleagues with respect. Understand that there's differing opinions on issues, and while those divides are often deep, they don't have to be personal.
But how hard is it to do that when you're in such a you're in the largest majority the House has ever seen for a Republican?
Well, I think it's hard, but I think it's a matter of keeping some perspective. And as committed as I am to my principles and my viewpoints, it doesn't mean we should silence the minority voices as well. At the end of the day, I have a deep amount of faith in this legislature's ability to make good policy decisions based on the weight of all the evidence, and that means both ideas from the majority and the minority.
As your chairman, as the chairmanship of the emerging issues in healthcare, healthcare has been such a major issue so far in this legislative session as we reach the halfway point, especially with all of the emphasis on Medicaid expansion and the Republican Party's total rejection of any expansion of it.
Sure.
Is there any chance whatsoever the Republican Party during this legislative session can back away from that, given especially all of the efforts being made by the governor to build grassroots support out in the state and some traditional Republican organizations that are urging you to do something?
Well, I think the legislature is going to continue to have a conversation about it, and I think we're going to try to make the best policy decision we can make. Do I see this legislature expanding Medicaid as envisioned by the Affordable Care Act and Obamacare? No, I don't see that happening. And I think it comes from the fact that we view Medicaid the same way that a lot of people do on both sides of the aisle, as a welfare program that isn't working very well right now. And it doesn't make logical sense to a lot of us to take the largest, most expensive welfare program we have and take and make it bigger. So Republicans are going to focus on trying to find ways to fix the system first. Now, what happens with eligibility as a part of those fixes and those reforms, I think is still an open question.
You say it's not working. What's not working the least?
We've seen incredible cost growth. There is very little cost containment within our current Medicaid system. Every year the cost to provide the exact same service goes up dramatically to the state, and that's because there really isn't any incentive built into the system to control cost. We have a problem with utilization. Beneficiaries don't have any incentive to make good decisions about how they utilize the benefits that we're providing under the programs. I've spent a lot of time in my district talking to ER doctors, have one of the best ER doctors in Southeast Missouri in Poplar Bluff. And he tells me that the utilization in emergency rooms for Medicaid beneficiaries continues to go up every year. That's a huge driver of Medicaid cost. Those are the types of things that we need to get a handle on before I believe we ought to move forward with expansion.
If they don't go to the emergency rooms, are they supposed to go to a regular doctor under the program?
We're generally talking about things that ought to be handled by a primary care physician. We're talking about minor injuries. We're talking about the common cold of all things, things that can wait for a primary care visit that when you don't have any incentive to go visit a primary care physician, a lot of people choose to use the ER.
Sounds like it's an education problem then.
Well, I think part of it is that, and I think part of it's the incentives. When we don't have beneficiaries that have any skin in the game, there's no difference to them whether they go to the ER or the primary care physician. There's no reason for them to make good choices.
Now, a lot of the people who are pushing for the expansion are saying that the uninsured are also a heavy burden in the emergency rooms, and that's one of the main reasons to expand it to include them. What does your emergency room doctor tell you about that concept?
Well, I think his concept would be the same, is that Medicaid right now is causing an access problem in a lot of the state, in a lot of parts of the state. And that by adding more people to Medicaid, you're going to only worsen that problem. Do we have a problem with people who are uninsured? Absolutely. But we also have a problem with Medicaid beneficiaries having access to care. In my part of the state, you have a very difficult problem not only with access to primary care physicians, but also access to specialty care, particularly specialty care. Fewer and fewer specialty doctors who are willing to take Medicaid patients. If we take and expand Medicaid by as much as 300,000 people in Missouri, that problem is only going to grow.
As the chairman of the emerging issues in healthcare, so we could talk about this Medicaid thing forever, but what do you see as emerging issues in healthcare beyond the Medicaid issue?
Yeah. Well, and let me be clear, my committee isn't tasked with dealing with Medicaid expansion. We have another committee in the House that's actually dealing with that particular issue. Right now, my committee's been focused on trying to deal with the issue of tort reform. Missouri passed a pretty expansive tort reform bill in 2005. One of the components of that was caps on damages in medical malpractice cases. Our Supreme Court ruled those damage caps unconstitutional this past summer. So our committee's been working to deal with that issue and to consider reinstituting those caps.
What kind of, are you going to increase the caps? How will you deal with that given the Supreme Court ruling?
Well, obviously we're trying to find a way to do it that will pass constitutional muster in the view of the Supreme Court. And I think our starting point is to try to put Missouri law back to where it was before that Supreme Court decision. We had a $350,000 cap on non-economic damages prior to that ruling. And I think there's a pretty good amount of consensus to put that level of cap back in place.
At the time that the caps were first put in, I remember during the debate in the House and Senate, the idea was that we better do this or doctors are going to be leaving.
Right.
How are we doing on numbers of doctors?
Well, I think if you talk to doctors, they'll tell you that the changes were very beneficial to the state. Medical malpractice rates have stabilized, and you see more doctors willing to practice in Missouri and stay in Missouri. The fear is that if we don't put those caps back in place, that we'll reverse that trend and start going the way we were in the early 2000s.
Complicated issue, and they're real personal issues that people are dealing with in the legislature. We want to thank Representative Todd Richardson for being with us today.
Thank you.
When we come back, State Senator Gina Walsh continues a Capitol dialogue with Bob Priddy on Missouri Legislative Update. Stay tuned.
Don't look at me. Your hair's a bit frizzy today. Aww, you should pick that up.
Every day, kids witness bullying.
Poor you.
They want to help, but don't know how. Teach your kids how to be more than a bystander. Visit stopbullying.gov.
Senator Gina Walsh is from Bellefontaine Neighbors in St. Louis County, and she is now about halfway through her first term as a Missouri senator after spending how many years in the House? Were you in the House?
I was there
full
8
8
years.
Yeah. So she moved over to the Senate this year, and we're going to talk a little bit about the beginning of her career as a Missouri senator. I suppose you have found the Senate is a distinctly different place than the House of Representatives.
Different. I found that the orientation in the beginning was way different. I really, the part that you came in and were a part of that, and that was pretty cool because they explored the traditions of the Senate, how it used to be, how it is now. I really enjoyed that, and it gave you, you know what, Senator McKenna, he has great awe for this chamber, and for somebody as young as he is, that just, it makes me feel good. Because he'll turn around when, like today, the Senator Richards was had a point of personal privilege, and Senator McKenna and I were chit-chatting in the back, and he grabbed my elbow and he said, Senator Richards has something really important to say. And I just think that's great, and I think every senator feels that way, because you could notice that if you go around the back of where we were all standing and chit-chatting, that it just was like a chain reaction. Everybody kind of turned around and listened to what that particular senator was saying at the time. And I think the respect that is in here makes everybody be able to do their job better.
How does the majority-minority relationship differ in the Senate than it did in the House? I keep hearing people say that it's a different climate.
So far, to me, it's very different because we did a second injury fund a couple of weeks ago, and if I was in the House, I just feel like I wouldn't have any input. I would have the input that the majority would allow me to have. And that's true to a point over here. But the tradition and the way the Senate is set up, every senator gets to be heard. And that's where the respect comes in. And I really felt like I had an input to that legislation to help make it better. Because as you know, I was on the opposing side. But I think, as Senator Justice said when we closed on the bill is not going to make everybody happy. It didn't make me completely happy. It didn't make the sponsor completely happy. It didn't make the leadership on either side happy. And it didn't make the business community throughout real happy. Everybody, it's a good bill then. Everybody had their input. There is something we can all own that we think makes it better. And I think that's what happens over here.
But the fact is you are one of 10 Democrats and there are 24 Republicans. And the Republicans are pretty much going to do whatever they want to do, won't they?
Well, they are, but I've noticed over here they let me have my say. I asked Senator Brown, I said, you must really like to hear my voice, because we went back to Senate Bill 29, and I had no idea we were going to it. As you could tell if you were in the chamber, I was a little flustered. It took me a minute to get my bearings because, you know, if we did it last week and we left it open with an amendment pending, and it's hard to keep track of where you left a bill off if you haven't visited it in a week or so. But even over here, that's even a little easier because we don't move as quickly. And I like that about that. We have the big tax bill coming up tonight or tomorrow. but I'm confident that we will debate it in a fair manner. Everybody will get to speak, and there'll be time to look at it. It's a 300-page bill. So everybody will have time to consume what's in that bill. And when you hear people say, well, they really don't read those bills, well, it's my job to read those bills. I read as much of them as I can. I read all the little pieces of paper my staff, I have a great staff, and nobody can function in this building without the help of their staff, because they do the research for you that you don't have time to do. Because as you know, I'm on appropriations, and I'm on 3 or 4 other committees, but appropriations meets at 8:30 in the morning, and soon we'll be meeting, I'm sure, in the afternoon when the House gets finished with the budget. You're in committee all day, so the only time to be to research would be when you left here at night, and you're not always all day dealing with the, not dealing with the public, but meeting with the public and working in committee makes it difficult to want to stay here past 9 or 10 o'clock at night.
With the 2-to-1 majority in both chambers of the legislature, the Republicans, do you feel that traditional Democratic positions, values, support organizations are in some way under pressure because of the legislation?
Absolutely. Absolutely, they're under attack. And I know in some cases it's a philosophical difference. And in some cases it's to take care of a promise made, but I like to hang my head on the philosophical difference, because I like to see the good in everybody. So I would hope that if somebody's disagreeing with me on a labor issue, it's because they disagree with me philosophically, not because of support of one person or another. Because I really do, philosophically, I think that those issues that I stand for are good for all the people of the state. But the fellow that might represent somebody someplace else might feel that his ideas are better for the people on my end of the state.
How important is it to have a member of your party as the governor when it comes to legislation?
Very important right now. Very important right now to every aspect, to health care, to education, to labor issues. It's extremely important, because that's going to be the final wall. If it gets through both these chambers and gets to the governor's desk, he's the last guy that may be able to stop it. And it just depends on who does their work and how they do it, whether he'll be able to sustain, his vetoes will be able to be sustained.
Now, you've been around when there have been some vetoes that have been challenged in the House of Representatives, and they've withstood.
Yes.
What causes people to vote for something on passage, but vote with a vetoing governor when it comes back to you?
Well, I don't know. I'd like to think it's the majority rules, but if that's the case, we'd lose every time. But maybe there's a long time before that bill becomes law. You know, we finished May 18th this year. Those bills become law August 28th. So when the bill gets to the governor's desk, it might be immediately if there's an emergency clause on it. It might be 3 months from now, but I'm sure that there is negotiations. I know there's negotiations going on in the background after it's left these chambers and once it's up on the governor's desk. So I have never had to vote. I've always stayed with the governor and my party. So I don't know what would change somebody's mind.
We have a long ways to go yet in this legislative session. A lot of issues that we haven't touched on here today will be touched on in the next several weeks in the second half, and we'll keep you up to date on what's going on with those issues as we go along.
And that's our show for this month. If you have any questions about the legislation that appeared in this program, please visit the Missouri Senate website at www.senate.mo.gov. There you'll find the contact information for the 34 members of the Missouri Senate, as well as a link to the Senate's newsroom website. I'm Jennifer Yapel reporting for the Missouri Senate.
And I'm Jonathan Lorenz reporting for the Missouri House of Representatives. If you have any questions regarding anything going on in the Missouri House, you can visit our website at www.house.mo.gov. For all of us with Missouri Legislative Update, thanks for watching. And we hope to see you again next time as we continue to highlight the stories moving through the Missouri General Assembly. Thanks for watching.